if they fired us both tomorrow and hired 2 new guys, what would we do? And they made a list and they said, well, why don't we walk out the door and come back in and just make those changes? I just don't think people believe they can do that. I think they think, it's just too far gone, or maybe they just don't see it. I don't know. But it can happen, and it happens to all of us at some level.
Hey, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast, where we're really about giving practical tools about leading in today's church. And can't wait for you to meet my friend Sean. But first, Erin, it's been a bit. How you doing? Welcome back.
Thank you. Just on the other side of a generosity campaign, building projects, all the things, Doug.
How's that going, Erin?
Hey, we had a great campaign, but any church leader that is listening that has done a building campaign of any kind, you feel my pain. You know exactly what I feel right now and why I have been a little MIA on the podcast. So there you go.
5. I helped lead 5.
Yeah. So you understand, Doug.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sean, how many have you done in your life? How many?
Oh, gosh. Several. So more than I wanted to ever do, truth be told.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Have you guys all been scolded for saying capital campaign? It's now a generosity initiative.
The generosity initiative, Doug.
Yes, exactly. So
just
old.
Goes to show how old you are.
That's right. So, Sean, will you introduce yourself to our listeners? Give us some of your story and who you are.
Yeah. Sean Kelly. I am at Mount Pleasant Christian Church in Greenwood, Indiana. Been here for the past year and a half. Before that, I was up in Northeast Ohio, outside of Youngstown, for 22 years. Had a 22-year run. A lot of fun, a lot of great growth, just incredible the way God moved. It was a small, more farming community where, we're in a town of 400 and the church is several thousand. And then we moved about a year and a half ago. I have been married to my wife for 25 years. I have 3 kids, 16, 18, and 20. And I have 2 Australian Shepherds that I love more than my children, and they know that. So that's basically who I am. I'm a pastor who loves the church, and I just love life in general. Try to enjoy as much as I can.
So Youngstown, Ohio. Just give a little bit more background, because I'm from Ohio, about 2.5 hours down the road from Youngstown. But Youngstown's a very unique, even though you're in Indiana now.
It's an interesting city. We were actually just south of Youngstown, but Youngstown was the steel boom city back in the 70s, 80s, and then became very depressed. We were in more of an agricultural community outside of that. We were about 35, 40 minutes away from Youngstown, but we were basically a micropolitan situation where we had multiple campuses in these small towns, anywhere from 400, where the original church was, planted back in 1831. And then we were in several other communities, 11,000, 25,000, something like that. And right before I moved, we'd launched a campus in Boardman, Ohio, which is kind of a suburb of Youngstown, and is about 40,000. So
yeah. Erin, did you know the ties from Vegas to Youngstown?
No.
Sean, can you enlighten our listeners?
There's a lot of mob connections in the great city of Youngstown, and that's a real thing. There's actually a mob podcast about the Youngstown mob, so it's a real thing.
Wow, I wonder if they'll ask us to be guests, Doug.
I know, we should lobby them.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Erin, do you know the church, Mount Pleasant Christian Church in Greenwood? It's a suburb of Indianapolis.
No, I've met some of your people along the way, but I don't know much about the church. So would you mind just kind of, telling us about Mount Pleasant and what made you say yes? Why'd you say yes to Mount Pleasant?
It's such a, I don't know how much time you want to go here, so cut me off. The long story short, Mount Pleasant's about 45 years old. Been kind of a pillar in the Christian church, really, especially in the Indiana Midwest region. Honestly, I wasn't looking to move. I thought I would retire at the church in Ohio. I had a couple of different opportunities along the way and turned them down. different churches, just that's the normal deal in our line of work. But I ended up, a friend of mine gave their search committee, their elders, my name, and told them and prefaced it, hey, he's probably not going to want to move, but he's got a lot of people he knows. He might be able to give you a name. Phil, one of our elders, calls me. We should have been a 10-minute conversation. An hour and a half later, he said, hey, why don't you pray about this for a couple of weeks? So I did, told my wife, didn't think it was going to be a thing. And after about 3.5 months, it was a thing. And we moved our family to central Indiana. I grew up in southern Indiana. Funny story. I told my dad when I was 19, my dad's almost 80 now. When I was 19, I'm never coming back to Indiana. And so when I called and told them that we were moving, he had remembered that. And he said,
Wow.
It's funny how you're moving back. But it's a cool church. Lots of things going on. It has just incredible potential, and we're seeing that come through. And it has a long legacy and history of good preachers and impact in the community.
That's cool.
That's
So
good.
you've been walking Succession.
Yeah.
So how's that? That's everybody's favorite topic in church leadership. Tell us how has Succession gone? What would you like? Yeah, what have been some highlights, some lowlights, whatever you want to share, obviously. Yeah.
Sure. Succession's it's an interesting thing because I left the church after 22 years. So watching them manage through some of that, but then also us transitioning here, it was very interesting. Now, again, I'm following a guy who had about a 22-year run. And interestingly enough, he moved here to Mount Pleasant at the same age I was when I moved my family. So there's just a lot of eerie, weird similarities. But things that went really, really well that I, and a big reason why we moved, and that was a big reason I stayed so long where I was our elders. Here had clear elder support, great guys, really wanted to get serious about continuing to reach not yet believers, reach our community. And they did an incredible job of honoring this. The transition had already started. Chris, who was the previous pastor, Chris Philbeck, had already told them about 18 months earlier. He basically gave a drop dead date of when he was retiring. And so that started a whole search process, and they were doing all of their due diligence. But it was a really interesting. I got to give him a lot of props. When he made the decision, he stopped doing things that could have been significant hindrances to me. We actually had a worship leader transition, and he wanted to wait to allow the next senior pastor to figure that out. He had put some things on hold, building wise, and some other things. So we had some capital set aside, but he kind of stepped away from that. And then, to give him credit, because he just lives right down the road, he really stepped away. And I think we all have stories of where guys didn't step away, and there was a weird tension, and he did not do that. So which was amazing. What he left, and what I loved, was he left a church that was biblically grounded. People were sold out to what they're doing within the church. They're committed, and super excited about the future and wide open to change. So it was like the perfect combination. When I was interviewing, my son even recognized, he's like, Dad, he's like, this, just the potential here is crazy. And so I always said it was a rocket just needing fuel. The rocket had already been built. We just needed to figure out some things, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here in just a bit, with alignment and those sort of things. But it has been seamless. I had coffee with a guy the other day who has been a member here for a while, but he's been a part of other churches, and he said the same thing. He said, I told my wife that there could be a quarter, of the congregation leave, and he had lived through a couple of transitions, and truthfully, we've grown through the transition, actually not lost any momentum, which is a testament to a lot of things. So good stuff.
Yeah. Sean, I think just a little more context for our listeners about who may not know the Indianapolis area where you're located. Just like, what's What's the area like? What are the people like around Mount Pleasant?
Yeah, it's Greenwood's kind of an interesting deal, and obviously, if you know anything about church world, especially Christian churches, there's just a lot of them in our region. But it's interesting how Indianapolis is broke up. You think everything's within close proximity, but it's really these little independent towns surrounding Indianapolis. We're 11 miles from downtown, so just south. So if you got out on the main drag 135 and drove right into Indianapolis, you'd run right downtown. What's interesting where we're at is there's a lot of there's a lot of people. Eli Lilly is a big pharmaceutical company, so there's a lot of uh, pharmaceuticals, chemists, a lot of internationals. We have a large, interesting Burmese population. It's actually the county right next to us. It's I think it's like 40% of the county is Burmese, and
Whoa.
we actually have two staff members from Burma that are a part. So we have a high population from India, a high population from South America. So it's kind of an interesting, weird melting pot of location and places all over the world. So it's
That's good. I'm going to ask you one more
yeah.
context question because a lot of our listeners may not be familiar with the Christian church.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners about the Restoration movement a little bit, the Christian church.
Yeah, I love it, because you're not we're not a denomination. I always say we're a non-denomination denomination.
Yes,
We
so true.
don't, yeah, we don't have a governing body. Every church is independent. We have a subset of theological alignments, I would say, and even some of those are not necessarily hard line. So there's a lot of independence. We're independently governed by a body of elders. So we're not connected to what another church does or somebody moving pastoral staff around or any of that. So we have a lot of freedom. At the same time, there's a lot of unity, which I love. I grew up in the Christian church. My dad was a pastor in the Christian church, small town Indiana, served the same church 44 years, and just always loved that part of who we are. So, and arguably some of the healthiest churches in the country are Christian churches. So, and I think some of that's because of we have some freedoms that maybe some other denominations don't have. So
Totally.
That's good.
Yeah. You alluded to it earlier, but maybe talk just a little bit of like what was the culture DNA of Mount Pleasant when you arrived? What did you kind of find when you arrived?
it was very interesting. And again, I took a lot of time when I was in the whole interview process. Had several mentors kind of give me some great advice. Gene Apple out at Eastside Christian had kind of walked me through some things, and one of them was just pay attention to and ask hard questions about really what's going on. So I spent a lot of time interviewing several of the staff, just trying to get an idea of, okay, where are the things that are really, really strong, and where are the things that we've really got to work on. We've been a larger church for a lot of years, but it seemed to kind of stagnate a little bit. Not that it wasn't large or still had people coming, but maybe vision drift, mission drift. One of the things that I noticed very quickly was our ministries, even though they were doing great things, were very siloed. So a lot of the departments were very independent, not clear direction in a unified way. I always say they love the Bible, they love people, they want to reach not yet believers, but they did it in a very, what I would say, fragmented way. Still effective, but it wasn't unified departments working cross, I say cross-pollinating. They were kind of independent doing their thing, and it was all good. I kind of put it this way: it's good people working very hard, but not always rowing in the same direction. So there's a lot of energy energy put forth, but not necessarily moving all in the same place. And yet we had a culture and a DNA of radically generous people that cared deeply for their community. So it was kind of this weird mix. It was very program heavy. That was something I noticed right off. And weren't completely clear with the programs, again, aligning those with mission vision. Like, hey, we're doing this stuff, we're getting a lot of people here, but what does that ultimately mean? We have strong facilities. We had high engagement on Sunday mornings, but there were some things that were off. We probably paid more people instead of empowering our volunteer base. Trying to keep up with what all is going on, and that's a time thing, as you know, in church world. That doesn't just happen overnight. And I think over time it had just become maybe a little easier in some arenas. So trying to rein some of that in and get some alignment. Those would be probably the big things, I think.
Yeah. I'm curious, Sean. I think a lot of our listeners can resonate with what you're saying about siloing. I think I saw Erin shaking her head and smirking. Were you doing that, Erin?
Of course I was, yes.
Yeah, siloing. The siloing. So I'm just curious, Sean, do you have, as a church leader who's been trying to unwind some of that, like, do you have thoughts around why we kind of drift toward that? And then how are you, what are really practical things you've done in the last year and a half to really go after the siloing, the downside of it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody intentionally, hey, we're not going to pay attention to this. I think everybody deep down in their heart has the same passion to reach not yet believers and to reach their communities. I think what happens is we get so stuck in the doing that I say it this way all the time to our team. I said, we work in it, but we don't work on it. And we gotta hit the in it pause button sometimes and just work on the organization. Where are we going? What are we doing? How are we going to do that together? And then hit the play button again. Okay, now let's get back in it, but make sure we've agreed this is where we're going. And I just think it's easier is really what it boils down to. You kind of come in, you get into a groove. Some people are winning, they're doing the things, and before long, you can drift off course and not even realize it because it's just a slow deal. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's because anybody's done anything wrong. I think it's just you end up there, and then once you get down that road so far, it's hard to rein it back in. I don't think it was Peter Drucker that said, talking with one of the guys that he works with, he said, hey, if they fired us both tomorrow and hired 2 new guys, what would we do? And they made a list, and they said, well, why don't we walk out the door and come back in and just make those changes? I just don't think people believe they can do that. I think they think, it's just too far gone, or maybe they just don't see it. I don't know. But it can happen, and it happens to all of us at some level. Just continuing to go back. Some things that we did, they're super helpful for me coming in, even getting a handle on things was, I literally sat down with every staff member. I took the first month that I was here, and I didn't do anything else really except meet with all of our staff. And I gave them a 4 helpfuls. They'd never heard of it. What's right, wrong, missing, confused. I sent them all an email. I said, what's right? Those are the things we want to keep magnifying. What's wrong? What are the things that we need to pay attention to? What's missing? Maybe there's some things we need to add that we're not. And then what's confusing? And I said, this isn't going to affect your job. This isn't a performance review. I just want honesty. Not thinking they would be honest because again, I'm the new guy, but they were honest, and it was great. It gave us a great kind of bouncing off point and then I sat down, I took a week and sat down and just looked for, okay, there's 20 different staff members saying the same thing in 20, different departments. Maybe this is something we need to start paying attention to, and really try to kind of put together a hit list of where are the pain points, and then which ones are we going to hit first. Now, my nature is strategic thinking. That's just kind of how I've always, my daughter says I think strategically about how we organize the refrigerator. So it's just kind of the way I'm wired. but it's super helpful to be able to then start to figure out, okay, where are we hurting? Now there's some things that I did fairly quickly within the past year and a half. I think it's funny. I think it's slow, but when you look back, it's a year and a half. You don't want to blow the place up. But we our leadership, our mission vision had kind of lost its punch. So that was one of the things that I worked really hard on was kind of a new mission vision, values, and what that means and why. Decision making was spread across way too many voices. So, and what I mean by that is strategic vision. Every department was sort of dictating for themselves where things were going, versus aligning behind, hey, here's where we're going, and then giving the staff freedom to do those things. So they weren't fully unified. Now everybody worked great together. I say all the time, I hit the jackpot with the staff lottery. I mean, these guys are a great team. It's just nobody had really in recent years aligned them behind some things. You know, the values weren't embedded in behaviors. So everybody was kind of, and you back to answer your other question too, roles became vague. Like, hey, go figure this out or go do this thing, but they didn't really know what they were doing. Accountability was inconsistent. So just because, again, everybody was so busy doing all good things, it just didn't necessarily align behind the greater win. And as Jim Collins so eloquently said when he wrote Good to Great, good's the enemy of great. And that's really what happened, was we settled for a lot of good things at the cost of greater things. How we're attacking it, again, the 4 helpfuls with each staff member was huge. We started clarifying expectations and kind of leadership pipeline. What's that look like for us? And we still don't have all that clear. I do a thing called sprints and runs. So break it down like a marathon. You know, if you're going to run a marathon, you train, you don't go run a marathon the first day. So here's the end goal. And then we back it up to, okay, what are our daily runs? What are the things we need to be working for? And then I do that in a 4x6. So what are the 4 biggest things I need to do in the next 6 months? And then I calendar those. So I put those as appointments, and I've got our management team we've not done this across the board yet. We have done it with our management team, where you have 6 months to attack 4 things. And those 4 things are going to be the most important things you do. And it's interesting, as we've started doing that, we're really starting to see some wins. And then the VIPs, you know, we brought you guys in very early, which I had worked with you before, and when we were in Ohio. So that really gave language and clarity, a lot of aha moment, you know. Elders were aligned with where we were going, so there wasn't a lot of I had kind of settled that before we had come in. I was just brutally honest with, hey, here's where I think some pain points are, and they have given us the freedom to do that. So there hasn't been a lot of infighting, which I know can happen. And then obviously preaching and direction with the people. So
it's really good. All right, you talked, you know, we're kind of talking around misalignment, places that maybe Mount Pleasant has been stuck previously. One of the things you mentioned that we talked about a little bit is the idea of silos, which, like Doug said, I think many of our listeners can agree. And I think some of the things you're talking about help with alignment, but they also help bring people together. And so we talk about it like we're trying to listen to the inner voice of the organization, which is what I hear you saying with the 4 helpfuls list. Like,
yeah,
what's the thing no one's saying, but everybody's feeling the consequences of? So listening for themes is a really important way to like break down the walls of the silos and bring people back together. But you also mentioned VIPs, which, just for our listeners that maybe don't know what that is, Sean, would you mind like explaining how you guys, what a VIP is from your perspective, and then maybe an example of one that you have done?
Oh gosh, we've done several, and they have been profound. I want to back up just for a second, because this will help, I think. And I totally stole this from Tim Liston at New Hope Church in Houston. Tim's a good friend of mine, but it really kind of paved the way for where we're going and what we're doing. my very first staff talk with our entire team was based off of, I told him, I said, I have more energy than probably anybody in the room. And if you're around me very long, you'll know that. So I said, we'll finish a big project and I'll be ready to knock out 10 more. It's just kind of how I am in my own life, just in every aspect, not just church world. And so what I did was I said, we can do this one of two ways. We can run stairs. And when we run, 8 sets of stairs and we accomplish this big thing, I'm going to be ready to run 8 more the following week. I said, or we can build, we can stop and we can rethink this whole thing and we can build an elevator. And I said, I'm going to warn everybody in the room, building an elevator is not sexy. It is not flashy. It does not get radical, crazy growth at the beginning. But I said, if we can do this right, then what happens is once we build it, we can all decide where we're going. We can get in the elevator together. We can hit the floor that we want to go to, and we can get out together, and we still like each other. And that's kind of been the goal. And I have just been relentless with, we're going to do small things over time to get us to where we're going. As I say to our staff all the time, we're playing chess, not checkers. So this is strategic, it's slow. So the VIP language, which I already knew ahead of time, but when Intentional Church came in and unpacked it with our management team, it was like diesel fuel on a fire. Like they're finally starting to see it. And so we started working on some different projects that, like, hey, where do we misalign that we can gain? And I kept saying, I want low-hanging fruit. Like we got a lot of things that we need to work through, and we still have things that we need to fix. There's no question. And it's gonna take a long time in some different areas. But what are some low-hanging fruit that we can get quick wins that everybody feels like they're winning? And it's starting to build the structure. And so we did several. One was around a message series, trying to kind of catalyze our congregation. Hey, here's the new guy. What's he going to do? It was funny. My very first week, a guy asked me in the lobby. He said, "Hey," he says, "Are you gonna cast vision for where we're going and what we're doing?" And I was like, "Bro, I can't even find all the bathrooms yet. So we're not talking vision for a while." And so I waited until the fall of actually into the new year, and then we did a series where we were trying to get everybody involved, and we got to catalyze the whole congregation. And we titled it "This is for Everyone." And I can unpack a little bit of it later if you want. But we put a team together to kind of think through all the different elements, and it was the first time that they had done that in such a way that was driving the entire organization, not a program, which was catalytic for our team. And we have since done 4 or 5 of those. We did one. We did a fall festival every year, and it was just one of those things I think we had just gotten in the rut of doing. And so we sat down with our team this last year and we said, okay, how do we turn this into double impact? And so we did more than double the previous year. And again, we had all these different departments working together, and we had 250 families that weren't connected to a church in our community, and we were able to follow through with, which we're now starting to see get connected to our church. So, and those are just 2 examples of several, where now the team's seeing the wins, and they, as once you see, kind of like IU football right now, once they see they can win, right? And
low blow.
Yeah, well, my daughter's an Ohio State fan. You live in Ohio as long as we did, so it's been hard for our family. But once you start seeing little wins, then all of a sudden you start believing you can do more, and you get this domino effect that ultimately almost becomes unstoppable.
It's good, man. I just encourage our listeners, if you're new to VIP or cross-pollinated, cross-functional teams, give yourself some space to learn how to do it, because it is not something we're taught, but it's a pretty powerful tool. I'm going to change the subject a little bit and kind of interview both of you around this. So, anybody around IC right now knows we're just really laying into this idea of reaching radical alignment of personal ownership of the Great Commission throughout our church, through every person in our church. And so I want to turn the conversation more to thinking about preaching. And I'd like both of you, because Erin, you do preach some at Canyon Ridge, right? How many times a year?
I preach every 4 to 6 weeks. So
Yeah. So how do you think about using preaching to bring alignment into people? And in the new book that's just come out, The Radical Alignment: Inspiring Journey to Becoming an Intentional Church, we talk about alignment of the heart. Like, am I passionate as an individual Jesus follower about his mission? My mind, am I aware and know what needs to be done in order to own the Great Commission personally? And then strength or action, am I equipped and trained in a way to live out the Great Commission? How do you both think about catalyzing people through preaching around this idea of owning the Great Commission? Erin, you go first, and then Sean after, if you would.
Sure.
yeah, a few different things. One of the things that we do at Canyon Ridge is we think about Acts 2, 36 to 47, like the first church, essentially, and the behaviors that motivated them. And so we use a simple tool called the Healthy Church Circle. And there's 12 kind of icons that we use in that, right? And so in that passage, it says, this Jesus who you crucified, God has made him King and Lord. So repent, be baptized, receive the Holy Spirit. So that's kind of the gospel, right? And then what follows that is the behaviors that marked the early church, right? So there was fellowship and prayer and sharing in the Lord's Supper, things of that nature. Those are the things they did. And then what did they experience? Well, at the end of all that, it says the Lord added to their number. The church multiplied out. And so our vision at Canyon Ridge is that we want to spark a movement of disciple makers with too many generations to count in the city of Las Vegas and beyond. And so when we think about our preaching series throughout the year, we're always looking at the Healthy Church Circle from Acts 2, and we're trying to identify which couple things is this series hitting on. So we're coming, obviously, I mentioned earlier, we're coming out of a generosity initiative. Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about the generosity of the early church, right? But in that, we always are bringing it back to how do we multiply whatever it is that we've talked about? How is that portable, repeatable? How can people take that and offer it to others? And so there are some drum beats that we offer in our preaching. No matter who's preaching, there is always a next tangible action step we're inviting people to take that week, something that someone could we often say it in a quirky way, like, how could people obey this in the next 47 hours? That it's achievable enough that we invite people into it and they could go do it and someone would know that they've done it. And so we're always offering a very, very portable, simple next step. And we're always preaching in line with Acts 2. Even if a series is, a mental health series, where does that fit in the values of the early church to kind of keep our teaching aligned to the scripture and then keep our teachers aligned? We have some basic things we drumbeat. We're always saying that, we are disciples who make disciples. That language finds its way into every single weekend in different expressions. We also believe, to the part you were talking about, Doug, around action, we often say, like, we're people who don't just listen to Jesus, but do what he says. And so that sort of line comes into teaching every single week and then offering a portable next step for people as well. And Drew, our lead pastor, often says, we teach to create hunger, not satisfaction. So how do we help people be hungry for the things we're trying to align to so that they're motivated to take that practical next step and walk it into their life and invite other people in their life to walk that into their life as well. So I don't know if that gets around your question,
Well,
Doug, but those are
it
some
does.
things. Yeah.
It really does. But just for
Really
my
good.
little pea-sized brain, 47 hours? You're trying to trick somebody? Like,
Yeah, it's just more memorable. It's just more memorable. Yeah.
Sean, how do you think about preaching around this idea of getting radical alignment in your congregation?
Yeah, a couple things. For me personally and for our team is every sermon has to connect to the mission one way or another. Now, one of the things we did was we rewrote our mission to kind of where we're going and what we want to be, which is we call it the 3 R's: reach, raise, release. We reach not yet believers with the love of God. That's evangelism. We raise disciples who are becoming more like Jesus every day. That's discipleship. and the discipleship component, and then we release people to live boldly for him right where they are, which is missional. And that's out of Matthew 28, Ephesians 4, and was it 2 Corinthians 5, I think, 5:20. So I try to, all of our series, everything has to have one of those components. Actually, we're now looking at even our events, but when it comes to preaching, like I want to make sure that every sermon connects to the mission in one way or another, and then tie that to discipleship outcomes. So this is, what is God saying? What am I going to do about it? We do something very similar at the end of a message. We give 3 action points for everybody, whether you're a not yet believer all the way to a seasoned, been a long-term follower of Jesus. We give you 3 action points that everybody can do, and have gotten a lot of positive comment, because some of it's reflective personally and some of it is action oriented, depending on which part of the mission that we're teaching about. Obviously, you anchor your vision and mission in Scripture. It's not a hype thing. It's, hey, this is what the Bible tells us to do. This is what it looks like. And then I try, and I think this is just important, is consistency. Is it's a consistent theme throughout everything that you do. The same voice, not my voice, the same voice of our mission, vision, values, and we're pointing in the same direction. And then I try to use every opportunity I can to point people to that vision. Like, hey, this isn't just something we throw on the wall somewhere. This is something that we all want to live and breathe. And here's how we do that in this context. And maybe it's from a discipleship standpoint, it maybe you've got to learn some things and wrestle with some things personally. Maybe it's did a series through the fruit of the Spirit, and we called it rotten. And the whole idea is that, we have a lot of rotten fruit in our culture, and oftentimes as believers we're that way. So it was really more self-reflective of, am I being more loving, and how does the Spirit impact our life that way? How am I, more joy, more, so it's less behavioral modification and more like, hey, the Spirit of God lives in us. What does this look like? And then start looking at our life and reflecting. So we try to do that across the board, with aligning to mission, vision, values is what it boils down to. So
yeah, that's great, both of you. It's just very thoughtful, and our time's coming to an end here soon. But I want to hit on one other thing on preaching, and that is, I use this phrase often with a team, like, people, I think, this is my opinion, you guys could disagree with me, I think people show up at church primarily to hear contextualized preaching of the Word of God, to shape their hearts and minds and their actions. And yes, music's important, worship's important. I'm not arguing that in programs that we offer. But I'm curious, do either of you have ways or thoughts that you work to get alignment in your ministry programs and the other things behind the power of what you're doing in the pulpit? You know what I'm saying? Oftentimes I'll say, pulling the rope in the same direction instead of ministry programs or these things that we're offering being all out here doing their own thing. And yes, we listen to preaching. Do you guys have ways or thoughts around how you get them more and more aligned so that there's synergy between the programming that we're offering and the pulpit?
Yeah, I mean, Sean, I'd love to hear from you too. I'll just back it up quickly. We do a seasonal discernment. So we discern for about 6 months at a time. We're trying to listen to God, to individually, a group of us, and together, to see what is he saying and what's he inviting us to focus on over this next 6 months, which is always in line with our vision. It's not some random new thing. It's always under the umbrella of our vision, right? But there might be different.
It's not a project, right?
No, it's not a project. It is like, what
Right.
are the themes that we sense God's inviting us to focus on? And that's not just preaching content. So, for example, we sensed about a year ago that God was really inviting us to like knit the relational fabric of our church. Like, we're a little disconnected. We need to knit the relational fabric. So we're going to preach in that direction, but then every single thing we do in every program we have is going to work towards knitting relational fabric. So then we might have a teaching theme, but then we're pulling all of the stakeholders of all of our ministries together and saying, how are you going to contribute to this theme, this discernment theme that's all in line with our vision? We do that every few months. So our stakeholders, what I mean by that is just different area leaders from different ministries. They're all aware of the weekend teaching. So for example, even if our student and kids ministries aren't teaching the same things we're teaching on the weekends, they are still in line thematically, and all things engagement and all of that are all pointing in the same direction. And that's something that we've really worked hard at over the last few years to do exactly what you're doing, Doug, is like be pulling on the same threads as consistently as possible.
It's good. Sean, how about you guys?
Yeah, a lot of similar. We're now, again, I'm just in this year and a half, so working through some other things, some, as we're aligning. For instance, in January, we're doing a finance series. So all of our groups, we do a set of courses, semesters, like college type stuff. It's not college level necessarily, but so we'll have something around that, Financial Peace University, those sort of things. So it's not just, hey, hear this, it's hear this and now act upon it. Again, what's God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? Depending on what topic we're talking about, we're also looking at events and things that we do to tie them together. So it's not just this random, hey, we did this baby dedication or dedication celebration for kids, but is it connected to something? So it's not just this weird one-off, but it blends together. This series that I did right before Christmas was a lead in to our Christmas series, kind of getting everybody's hearts ready for what we were doing. And we had some other alignment issues. We just did a big all in for everyone deal where we got volunteers. So we had a big push, not only the message, but then the follow through off of that. So it wasn't just, hey, sign up sometime, but here's what we're going to do. Here's the next steps you can take. Here's the meetings you can go to. So it's not just this random, hey, I'm going to get a phone call. We actually have a system of follow up, because again, it's back to hearing what God has to say, but then acting on it in some capacity. And then, as I say all the time, for me personally, I just always preach with the mission in my back pocket. Like every single week, what are things that we're doing that I can highlight that actually is driving mission too? So if there is a one-off in a message or whatever, I'm like, oh man, we need to be talking about this more. So I'm always trying to use that opportunity to drive something else. Hey, here's another opportunity that you can do that. So it's not, maybe we missed it in the planning perspective, but if we catch it, then we can still sort of drive people to that thing based off of what we're teaching.
Yeah. Fascinating, guys. Thank you so much, Erin. First off, great to have you back in the mix.
Yes.
And Sean, thank you for doing this, man, taking time. If our listeners weren't picking up on it, we are recording this before the holiday. And what I'm hopeful for is that Ohio State beats the snot out of Indiana.
That's my hope too, brother. It's my hope too.
January when this airs. So, thank you for tuning in and listening. And again, we're at IC. We're all about just providing practical tips from the trenches of ministry around this idea of how do we get every person in our church to own the Great Commission personally. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to check out the new Radical Alignment book. It's on our website, available there at Amazon, wherever you get books. And it is like everything IC builds. It's built like a practical tool that you and your team can walk through together at the end of each chapter. There's team questions for you guys to go on a discovery journey together. Thanks for tuning in and listening, and we'll see you next time.